Captain America Civil War is directed by Anthony Russo and Joe Russo, written by Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, and stars a whole lot of people from the MCU, including returning actors Chris Evans, Robert Downey Jr., Sebastian Stan, as well as some newcomers like Daniel Bruhl, Chadwick Boseman, and Tom Holland. And in Captain America Civil War, because of the events of the previous films, the Avengers are asked to sign what are known as the Sokovia Accords, which will effectively put the Avengers under the control of the United Nations. And Tony Stark, who feels a lot of guilt because of the events of the previous films, decides to sign, but Steve Rogers, who has grown to distrust the government because of his own adventures, decides not to sign. So these two ideologies clash and we have our Civil War. Now I know this is a very late review, be prepared to see a lot of these late reviews coming up. And at this point in time, I've seen Captain America Civil War twice now, which is already a lot for me. And I will admit that the second time I watched it, I liked it a lot less, but I still think it's a great movie. First of all, on a visual level, again, the makeup work, the costume design, it's still as good as it's ever been. I really like how the MCU finds new ways to tweak the characters' costumes to give them like new stuff to play with, especially Falcon, who has a lot of new toys. Crossbones, who doesn't necessarily appear that long in the movies, played by Frank Grillo. I love his costume because, you know, you immediately understand how it works. A lot has been said about Spider-Man's costume. You can read up online about how the way his eyes adjust are meant to reflect the evolution of the art of Spider-Man's eyes throughout comic book history. But there's also a cool story-based reason for why his eyes adjust. And of course you have Black Panther, and like everything about Black Panther in this movie is amazing, and his costume is imposing and awesome. Now, not all of the CGI is perfect in Civil War, but all of those, the parts where there might be a little deficiency, they're all made up for in the big airport fight scene in the middle of the film. It's just like on a visual level, it's staggering what they're able to achieve because of just the variety of visual effects happening on screen, and it looks so great. The sound design also helps a lot, especially in this airport fight scene. It helps keep all the characters distinguishable from each other. It really helps keep the action coherent. And in terms of music, this is something that you might only notice if you go back to the previous MCU films and look at their musical scores, like how the first Iron Man has a very rock-heavy soundtrack, how Captain America the First Avenger has lots of like World War II theme influences. The Avengers has its own theme. But here in Civil War, I feel like Henry Jackman's score really heralds the coming of Phase 3 because his music is a lot more emotional here. Now, Captain America Civil War is almost 2.5 hours long, and I think it's paced incredibly well. You don't feel it at all thanks to editors Jeffrey Ford and Matthew Schmidt. And key to making this movie flow so well is the fact that both Cap and Tony have pretty much equal screen time in this movie, and I know that makes it more of an Avengers movie than a Captain America movie, but I'm fine with that. What's cool is that because you get to see both of their sides almost equally, you begin to challenge what side you're on. Also, just one little scene that I want to highlight in terms of editing. There's a certain scene that takes place in 1991 that they repeat a couple of times throughout the movie, and every time you see it again, it becomes clear that they're building up to something greater, so you're anticipating it, and when it finally pays off at the end, the emotional impact is amazing. But honestly, the best thing about the Marvel movies at this point, at least the really good Marvel movies, is the writing, not necessarily the action, but the plot in Civil War is just so great because there's a lot of real drama, real dark drama in between all the action and stuff, and it feels earned. It feels like a culmination of the 12 movies that came before this one. There's a ton of characters here, but every single character gets their moment to shine. You understand why all of them are here, why all of them are fighting, so they all feel essential to the plot. Of course, there's snappy dialogue, of course there's humor, but this stuff never overshadows the pretty dark themes in this movie of friendship and guilt and betrayal. And in terms of writing, I really have to mention Baron Zemo, who's played by Daniel Bruhl. A lot of people have been hating on this guy, but I think he's a great villain. I've said this before, but I would really much rather have a well-rounded, good character as a villain than some nameless badass who fights well. Zemo has his own arc. You care about him to a certain extent. He's very sympathetic, and I think he's a great villain. And of course, all the actors here really bring their A-game once again. Chris Evans as Captain America, he's a lot more world-weary in this movie. I think he makes it very clear that every decision that Steve makes is difficult for him. Same goes with Sebastian Stan, who really conveys Bucky's burdens and just how much he hates being the Winter Soldier. And Chadwick Boseman as Black Panther, as T'Challa, he really sells his arc very, very well. Like, he manages to distinguish himself from all these other characters. Like, he comes off completely unique, and you're invested in him immediately. Tom Holland as Spider-Man or Peter Parker is instantly likable, and he's really, really good at showing the naivety of this very young version of Peter Parker, and he's really great comic relief as well. well together with Paul Rudd as Ant-Man. And it's just so great that the chemistry among all these actors is so good. I mean, they all really feel like one big family, even if they're all fighting. But what's really cool is that all the characters have like different relationships with each other. You know, no one treats everyone like the exact same way. But if there's one actor I have to single out in this movie, it has to be Robert Downey Jr. This is probably the best he's ever been as Tony Stark. There are a couple of really emotional moments where he almost had me in tears. He was that good. He never phones in his performances as Tony Stark, and it's just the same here. And once again, the Russo brothers successfully carry over their gritty style from Winter Soldier, but they're able to inject humor as well into the movie. They do it arguably better than Joss Whedon did it. And as action directors, they've really only gotten better. And this is something I've mentioned also before, but what I love about their action here is that they use their settings really well. The settings feel like video game levels in the sense that every single rooftop and stairwell feels like it's there for like a strategic purpose. It's not just inconsequentially in the background. And it's a credit also to the Russos for never painting Steve or Tony as just completely correct or completely wrong. In my opinion, it's clear that Civil War is a movie that does not aim to give you an answer about who's right, but it really aims to paint that middle ground, that gray area, and it shows that it's a tragedy in itself that these two people are actually fighting. Now, as for my flaws with this movie, these are things that I only really noticed the second time I watched it, but for one, there's a little bit of incoherent editing in some of the more realistic, gritty fight scenes. It feels like they're trying to be a bit too much like the Bourne films. But I have a bigger issue with how they skip over some pretty important plot points, and with how Zemo, while he's a good character in my opinion, his plan is admittedly pretty convoluted unnecessarily, and you know, they paint him to be kind of like a powerless guy, so it's a bit of a stretch to imagine that he can do like all the things that he does in this movie. But ultimately, those are very, very small flaws for me, at least in this movie. I still think Captain America Civil War is a great movie. It's definitely still in my top 4 MCU movies of all time. If you're new to the franchise, it's admittedly a bit hard to just kind of jump in. You really have to watch all the other 12 movies, but it's completely worth it. Alright, so those are my thoughts on Captain America Civil War. Have you guys seen it? What do you think about it? Whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.